Hey, it's Andrew back here at BTORange in Conroe, Texas. We're back in the video lab today. And on the bench we have, and recently we've been doing a lot of collectible stuff, and this is more of an everyman shotgun, but there's enough of them out there. You see them everywhere. You can't really swing a dead cat inside a pawn shop without hitting a version of this shotgun. This is a Stevens Model 67 Series E, so and we'll get into what all that means in a minute, but it's a Savage Arms product utilizing their Stevens brand name, and there's just a ton of these out there, and they're so commonplace that I thought it'd be a good idea to do a little video on it, a little bit about the history. There's not a ton out there actually about the history of this shotgun, and some of the things to watch for and some of the pitfalls about this particular series of shotgun that kind of rendered it, I don't want to necessarily say second tier or second class, but certainly a back seat behind things like the Remington 870, the Mossberg 500. So in any event, it is a Savage product. Savage acquired Stevens, which was a completely separate firearms company way back in 1920. And they incorporated a lot of their products, and they even produced, Savage continues producing guns under the Stevens name even through today. It's a trademark or a brand name, I guess, used by the Savage Arms Company, as well as Springfield. And that's a huge source of confusion with a lot of people, that Savage used the Springfield, not Springfield Armory, not Springfield Arms, not U.S. Springfield, not any of that, but they used just the brand name Springfield on a lot of the products they produced as well. And folks confuse that with the current day Springfield Armory, which has nothing to do with the U.S. Armory under that name from years back. So, I mean, there's just a ton of confusion still out there among that, and we have to clarify that, maybe not on a daily basis, but quite a bit still, even today in 2025, we have to clarify that to customers, that they don't have a Springfield Armory. This is not a Springfield Armory shotgun, or their particular Springfield branded Savage isn't Springfield Armory, and it isn't a U.S. product. So, I mean, it's just a thing, kind of like Henry. It has nothing to do with the original Henry Repeating Arms Company. But anyway, so Savage acquired Stevens about 1920. Then they acquired the Fox Shotgun Company in 1929. So they made, in those immediate pre-Depression era days, they made some pretty good acquisitions to kind of solidify their position, especially in the shotgun world. And shotguns have been kind of a mainstay of their product line ever since. Now, today's Savage products, Savage shotguns, even under the Stevens name, are typically Turkish-produced pump shotguns, basically a regeneration of the old Winchester 1200 line. But that said, this is a U.S.-made gun, and there are Savage changed their production facility location in certain times, in certain years, and that's one way to generally date when your Savage product was made. There really aren't any very specific charts out there, but we'll get to that. There are on things like the 99, but not on these utilitarian shotguns. So Savage made guns in Utica, New York, through World War II, and they had the Stevens facility still in Chicopee Falls, Massachusetts. And after World War II, everything solidified in Chicopee Falls through 1960. And from 1960 forward, we see the move to Westfield, Massachusetts. So if your gun is marked like this gun, Westfield, Massachusetts, you know that it's at least 1960 or later. And just as a side note, Savage acquired a company called Lakefield Arms in Ontario, California in 1994, where most of their rimfire rifles are produced, even still today. The Model 93s and what have you are Canadian. So if you look on the barrel of your gun, if you have one of these guns, look on the barrel. If it's marked Stevens, like this one is, Stevens 67 Series E, in small print under that, you'll see Savage Arms Company, Westfield, Massachusetts, as well as the caliber marking, gauge marking, 12 gauge, 2 3/4 or 3-inch gun is what this gun is. So Stevens had pump shotguns, and then Savage, after they acquired Stevens, had pump shotguns in the line before these guns, the Model 520 and Model 620, and a couple of others that were beautifully complex little guns. They dovetailed together in the front. They were takedown shotguns. And when we get one of those, if we should come up on one, they're kind of harder to find. They're worth the video in unto themselves if we can come up with one of those. But in any event, along about 1957, 8-ish, some say as early as 55, and a lot of this we have to base on existing print catalogs. The Savage Model 30 was introduced, and the Savage Model 77 was contemporary to that. Similar guns, similar actions, a lot of internal parts changed. The difference basically is going to be in the finish in the wood. So the Savage Model 30, and one of the things Savage, we have to remember about Savage is on their upscale or their premium line of product, that was Savage trademark guns. The stuff that were marketed more to the department stores and things of that nature would usually have the Stevens or the Springfield name to them. Or you'll see a ton of these under Western Field for Montgomery Wards. You'll see and just a variation of different brand names that were contracted by either large hardware store, department stores. JCPenney's did some. All of them were in the business of selling guns at the time. Sears, JCPenney's, Kresge's, Montgomery Ward's, obviously Western Auto. They all contracted with some of the major manufacturers like Savage, like Marlin, like Mossberg to produce firearms for them under a specific brand name. Basically the same gun with some minor changes. Typically, it was in the construction materials. For example, birch wood instead of walnut stocks. Maybe they didn't have the engraving, they didn't have the vent rib. So the Savage 30, for example, had engraving on the receiver, not hand engraving, but machine rolled engraving on the receiver, was available with a vent rib. And the Stevens 77, which was introduced around the same time, typically did not. It was a plainer, everyman kind of shotgun designed for folks that wanted an inexpensive yet reliable shotgun for the farm. They were introduced in, they may have been 12 gauge, obviously. I believe 16, although I'm not 100% sure. That 20 for sure, 410 for sure. I've never known of one in 28 gauge. So they rounded out the spectrum. They were all fixed choke guns. In other words, not an internal choke gun, although they did have some models that had the external variable dial, select choke kind of thing on them. So that was available from the factory as well. And then a ton of them were modified afterwards by gunsmiths and gun shops with that poly choke type addendum to them. So, but that was also available from the factory. So, in the Savage 77 version, we also see that being used by the U.S. military. The Savage 77E was brought into United States service, saw service in Vietnam. It was a very prolific shotgun, 18-inch barrel shotgun, fairly plain, typical U.S. military style. I don't want to say a trench shotgun, but it was just the short barrel version of the 77E with a phosphate type finish, and was a very prolific shotgun in Vietnam. So you could see those 77Es out there with U.S. acceptance marks like the flaming bomb marking and things of that nature. So be very careful about that, because it was only 77Es, nothing else. So if you see a 67 or a 30 or something other than a 77E that's been cut down and has a flaming bomb marking on it, red flag should go up. That's probably not a real gun. Somebody took a $150 shotgun trying to make it into something that it is not. So buyer beware. Just like absolutely any, I don't care if it's a Model 12 Winchester, if it's U.S. property marked, you need to just, if you're not sure, 100% sure, you need to have someone else look at it to determine whether that is real or is it Memorex, right? Yeah, I guess you have to be a certain age to remember that particular slogan, but whether it's real or whether it is fake or not. So up until the Gun Control Act of 1968, a lot of these guns were not serialized. They didn't have to be. Because domestically produced shotguns made in the United States prior to the passage of the Gun Control Act were not required to be serialized, but they were after that. So I think it was October of 1968 is when that occurred. So at that time, Savage began serializing guns. Some of their guns had been serialized prior to, but a lot of the shotguns were not. They didn't have to be, so they weren't. But then after that GCA 68, they had to be. So we see serial numbers occur, and we see serial number prefixes start to occur. So there are charts out there that kind of roughly date the Savage production. That includes the Stevens production, or Savage guns under the Stevens name, based on a serial number prefix. For example, this is E Echo is the serial number prefix on this gun, and that's roughly 1982 through 1987 is when we see that particular prefix being used on the Savage Stevens guns. And then there's another chart that basically cuts that down a little bit further, but I'm not sure it's particularly model specific. And that chart indicates that this would be a 1984 production gun. So I'm not 100% happy with absolutely saying it's a 1984 gun, but it's as good a guess as any. It falls within that serial number prefix, and that's about right. So we still see the Model 30 in production all the way through. The Model 30 was in production when this gun was produced. That gun was produced through 1978. Or at least that's its last catalog appearance is 1978. So we see a more deluxe version of this gun, and that Model 30, starting in 1969, had interchangeable barrels. In other words, you could similar to the Mossberger, the 870, you could turn a big retaining screw here on the front, pull the barrel off of it, and then put a different choke constriction or barrel length barrel on the gun. Not available on the 67. This is a fixed barrel gun. It is what it is. It's that kind of an everyman type shotgun. So on this gun, the 67, the Econo grade version, we have birch stocks or hardwood other than walnut, right? So I don't know if it's birch or it's ash. I don't know. But they're walnut finished birch stocks. And you can see from the little scrapes and scratches on it here and there, you can see that bright whitish yellow wood shining through that you would not see with walnut. So the Model 30 typically had walnut stocks on it, but just like everything else, they started cheapening those down to reduce production costs as time went by. But you do see 30s with ventilated ribs, you do see 30s with the rolling grave receivers, and you do see them with checkered stocks, even though they're pressed checkering on the stocks. You'll see some 67s also with pressed checkered stocks as well, but this one does not in the 80s. So as we get later in production on this gun, as we get into the 80s, and these guns went away not long after this. It was sometime around the mid-80s is when the guns completely went away, I think. I may be wrong on that. I haven't looked through all the catalogs from that date forward, but there's general consensus among users on at least reported forum postings on the internet that the quality started to suffer a little bit, and there were some versions of this gun, and I wanted to talk about the different series. It's very confusing when you go to work on these guns, because anytime they did some type of internal change on a part that became a different series. So you have Series A, Series B, Series D. We see that throughout the Savage production. Regardless of the model, you'll see them as Series A or maybe just a letter appended to the number. So it can be somewhat difficult if you're a gunsmith going to look for a part for a particular model. You have to make sure, because what 67E may not be a 67 Series E with parts interchangeability, so that can be somewhat difficult to deal with. So one of the big complaints that we see about this gun, I'm not just trying to beat on the gun, because it's for what it it's designed to do, it does that job well, is it only has one action bar. So we're clear here, so I'm going to start manipulating the gun just a little bit to show you some of the features of it. So this is the action bar, and there's only one. It's only on that one side. So that allows a little bit of, I don't necessarily want to say torque, but maybe wobble as the action goes back and forth, and it causes the action to be a little bit rougher than other guns. Now, probably this gun's biggest competition contemporarily was the Mossberg 500. And the Mossberg 500, when it came out in 60, I think it was 60. It had one action bar only, but Remington had the patent for dual action bars at the time. And when that expired in 1970, it didn't take long for Mossberg to jump on the dual action bar. So Mossberg 500s now, or from about 1971 on, had dual action bars. And Savage never did that. It was always a single action bar, and we run into that from a gunsmithing perspective because they tend to separate where the bar, there's a metal tube under here that this forearm slides onto, and the nut attaches it here. But it'll separate, it's brazed, so it'll separate there, and it hopefully it can be rebrazed or somehow reattached, but parts for these guns do exist. Another complaint that we hear about this gun is the construction of the trigger guard itself. So this is an 80s gun, so this is a synthetic, it's a plastic, but earlier guns have I'm pretty sure it's an aluminum zinc mixture, like a Zamac kind of trigger guard feature that is prone to cracking and splitting, so that can be a problem, and they really can't retrofit a later trigger guard to an earlier gun. So it just kind of is what it is, and I haven't found a way to repair it. I've tried it. There's some, and maybe I'm just not that good at it. That's very possible too, but I even tried some low temperature braze designed for pot metal, and I had trigger guard soup really before you knew it when I started putting heat to it. But when you start to do something heroic like that with one of these old shotguns, you really, from a gunsmith's perspective, you have to stop and look and tell the customer, look, this is going to cost whatever that amount of money. This is going to cost $150 to repair the gun, and that tops out the gun in value. And then the question becomes, well, grandpa this or my great uncle this and all that. And that's, you know, if you're the gunsmith, get payment up front. That's all I'm saying. So one major change, the earlier guns had the safety here behind the trigger guard. That changed in 1969. We see this Tang safety come out in 69, which really is kind of an improvement. Mossberg 500 has a Tang safety up here. That's one of their selling points for sure. So it's obviously it is makes the gun ambidextrous safety-wise, which but you still have the ejection port here, obviously. One of the other things to be concerned about, concern's probably not the right word. Something to watch is if you're evaluating one of these guns, or pull the bolt to the back, and if you look in this ejection port here, we'll put a still photo up of this. I'll take a still photo of it. The ejector is housed in a rectangular housing, like rectangular and tube don't go together in my mind, but I mean, you get the idea. And that's screwed into the side of the receiver right here. There's a spring-loaded plunger inside that rectangular holder that functions as the ejector for this gun. So, and that's screwed into here. So that's commonly lost. The good news is they're readily available. So watch for that as well. So if you have wonky ejection or you're having a glitch in the action, make sure this is nice and snugged up. The other thing to watch for is how this gun comes apart. So the buttstock does have a through bolt, and there's a receiver back here for that buttstock bolt, but you could pull this screw here, and this is a splined pin, so it goes out one way, goes in one way. So you'll have to look at it to see which side the spline is on in order to drive it out the correct way. So on this one, we can see that there's no splines on the right side of the receiver. We can see the splines on the left side. So it would go out that way to avoid damaging the receiver. And then this entire, you can do it without taking the buttstock off, actually. The entire unit will come out, will slide this way and then out, exposing all the guts of the trigger guard. We may do a take apart video on one of these shotguns. I don't like working on them. I really don't. Just from a business perspective, it's the squeeze, or the juice is not worth the squeeze, basically, is what I'm trying to say. But most of the springs in there, the carrier spring, all those springs are just heavy wire springs that are indexed in just a hole drilled into the side of that trigger plate. So they're not retained well. Things get out of alignment in that trigger group relatively easily compared to other designs. And it can cause the action to have a lot of problems. And it can cause, you have to have the spring at a correct angle for the bolt to unlock correctly, for the bolt lock to work correctly. And it can be, it could take a lot of time to diagnose and repair one of these shotguns, and time is money, and sometimes you top out these shotguns pretty quickly. So having said that, a gun in decent condition that's working is still a usable shotgun. There's no reason not to use it and shoot it and hunt it, and it wouldn't be a bad shotgun to have around, you know, for that brother-in-law that shows up to hunt dove or whatever and doesn't have a gun to do it with. I wouldn't feel bad of showing him how to work the gun and then letting him use this one to hunt while I use, you know, an over-under or something that I don't necessarily want him dragging off through the weeds. So what are these things worth? Well, not a ton, but I mean, they're not free. I mean, there's still money involved. So yeah, it's, usually you find these on the used gun rack in pretty beat up condition because, I mean, they were designed to hunt. They were an inexpensive gun when they were new. They were designed to hunt with, and people did and used them and abused them, and that's fine. That's what they were designed to do. So you typically can pick these up anywhere, depending on condition. They're not scarce. So originality, scarcity, condition, the same things we talk about, right? They're not scarce under the various different brand names that these were made. They're hundreds of thousands. And I know somebody's probably going to say 1 million, but that's 100,000, so hundreds of thousands. And so they're not scarce. Originality, we see a lot of these cut for pads. This is a factory. This one came with a pad. They started doing that when they went to 3-inch Magnum chambers. I have no idea what year that was, but a lot of these were just plated guns, butt plate guns, and folks cut those and put pads on them. And a lot of times they didn't have a gunsmith do it. They just pulled the pad off, you know, turned the 2 screws off and screwed the pad on. It looks like exactly that, and it just is what it is. But a lot of times you can pick these up for $150, if not somewhat below that. The 410s tend to go, and 20 gauges tend to bring more money than the 12. But they're not rare. It's not a factor of rarity. It's just a factor of, I guess, shootability. People are wanting the 20 gauge or the 410, maybe for a younger person. That may be why. Now the Model 30s, the higher grade Model 30s with the vent rib and the interchangeable barrels, things like that, they can bring over 200. They can get in that $250 and $300 mark pretty easily. And even the utilitarian guns can get between 150 and 200 fairly easily as well, just from the fact that it's a usable utilitarian shotgun that you can go out and shoot today. And $200 now is not what it was in 1967 when the gun, or 1984 when the gun was produced. So anyway, I thought it would be a neat little shotgun that probably everybody has seen. If you don't have one, you know somebody that had one or has one now, or you've seen them on the rack of the local gun shop or pawn shop and you haven't paid a whole lot of attention to them. And that's a shame because you probably should have one just to have it stashed back in the event you don't want to drag out something that costs you $600,000, $700,000, $800,000 or more to go on a hunt with. Hunt that one. And I'm not going to drag my 682 Beretta through South Texas thorn bush field, but I'll take that one through there for sure. So anyway, if you like what we're doing, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. We enjoy that. Man, I'm just so thrilled with the amount of views that this channel gets. It just makes me feel good about doing this stuff. So we'll keep doing it as long as you guys keep watching. And hit that little bell thing that notifies you when new videos are coming out. So, and we will see you on the next one.